Who had a pretty high-ranking job at the White House, on her way out. And she is speaking out, not only to Good Morning America last night to Nightline. Here's what she said on diversity.
There was a lack of diversity that I will acknowledge. And at times it was very lonely because a majority of them were white men who had their own agendas. Many of them had never worked with minorities, didn't know how to interact with them. So at times they would say very little, unless it was policy-driven or decision-driven or there was a presidential action. I didn't have a whole lot of conversations with many of them. On the other hand, there were some who became very great friends. And so it has been very, very challenging being the only African-American woman in the senior staff.
All right, Tolu, she also was the only African-American in the White House making that top salary bracket. Now she's on her way out. This is looking like it's going to be a pretty big potential headache for the White House. How do you see it?
Yeah, this is not a message the White House wants to be hearing right now. You have to remember that in Alabama, the African-American vote and the African-American turnout, specifically among black women, is part of the reason that Trump's preferred candidate, Roy Moore, did not win. Now this message is getting out from someone who was part of Trump's inner circle, who just recently left and now is going on the TV circuit talking about the lack of diversity within the White House, the fact that she was made uncomfortable by the lack of diversity and some of the issues that that President Trump and some of his allies were bringing up during their time in the White House.
Yeah.
A number of African Americans have seen what President Trump has done, trying to erase the legacy of President Obama, talking about very fine people on both sides of Charlottesville, and it's made them very uncomfortable, and it could result in a reckoning in 2018 during the midterms.
You know, and Jackie, when you just think about sort of what the Republican Party needs, and you know, just to be fair, they didn't actually need it this time around to win the presidency, but was this an anomaly? They needed to broaden the base. I mean, they need more minority support across the board, and that's only going to get more and more true as this country gets more and more diverse every election cycle. So how do you see this Omarosa thing playing out?
I mean, it seems bigger than Omarosa, frankly, because this is a White House that has never targeted anyone other than their base, and they don't really show signs of changing. I mean, let's not forget, during the campaign, their message to African-American voters was, what do you have to lose? That's not really very inspiring, and they haven't really reached out at all to that particular community. So there hasn't been a reckoning yet. I mean, Alabama is a part of that, but there hasn't been a reckoning yet for this White House to show them that they do need to broaden their horizons here. There hasn't been that lesson has not been learned yet.
Amy, I think the White House would much prefer to talk about tax reform this morning than Omarosa. So let's talk about tax reform because it matters also for a lot of American people. If the president can pull this thing off, and it's not, there's no sort of check in the W column yet. We don't know if the numbers are there. But if the White House can pull this off in the president's first year, this hasn't been done since the mid-1980s in this country, how big of a political dividend do you think that actually is for the president?
It's huge, and I think that's why he was really pushing for it for months at a time. This was his big grand plan. He tried for other policy. It failed. They needed to put points on the board very badly here, and this is what they're aiming to do. And I think going into 2018, a year where Republicans, you know, they don't have a lot of momentum right now. They really desperately need some kind of momentum going forward.
The issue is, and Tulu, I was just talking to voters in Michigan and Kentucky, Trump voters, about this. They're really hopeful for this president. They're really hopeful for tax reform. There's nothing in this tax bill, as we haven't seen the final version, but we've seen a lot of what's going into it, that is going to make a huge material difference for poor or middle-income folks right away. And what I mean is the promises that this president made about it's not going to help the rich, it's going to help the middle class, it will give some relief to them. But is it going to really be life-changing enough to move the needle that much for the president?
Yeah, there's a big disconnect between how the president is selling this bill, saying it's the biggest tax cut ever, and what is actually in the bill, specifically for members of his base and members of the middle class. People may see, you know, a few $100 extra in their paychecks next year, but it's not going to make a huge material difference in their lives the way the president has explained it, and that could end up backfiring when people believe that people at the top end of the income spectrum and corporations are getting the bulk of this tax cut. That could lead to some of the class warfare and some of the fairness argument, and Democrats are using that to attack this bill, and it's part of the reason that the popularity of this bill is somewhere in the high 20s or low 30s. So not necessarily something that's going to help them in 2018.
You do have more and more folks making comparisons to the way President Obama got, Obamacare through. When you do things along partisan lines, you can run into major obstacles down the road when it's all playing out. How does it actually impact people? Let's have a little fun this morning and talk about Joe Biden and if he is going to run for 2020. My good friend Chris Cillizza here at CNN has a great column on it this morning, and he says that Biden has made very clear, in his opinion, this week that a run for 2020 potentially in the cards. He just said he should apologize to Anita Hill for not doing more to help her when she was testifying in front of Senate Judiciary when he was part of the Senate years ago. And then he said this on The View.
If I were offered the nomination by the Lord Almighty right now today, I would say no, because we're not ready. The family's not ready to do this. If in a year from now, if we're ready and no one has moved in that I think can do it, then I may very well do it.
What do you think, very quickly?
Oh, yeah, I think he's running. I think he's always kind of regretted the fact that he couldn't really run in 2016, resented Hillary Clinton a little bit for kind of boxing him in. And so I think this is maybe his last chance to do that.
You're in. Okay, I got 20 seconds. Jackie, yes, no, maybe so, Biden?
I think Joe Biden very much wants to run for president. He loves running for president. He loves being out there with the people. I don't know that he'll do it.
All right. Thank you guys very much. Have a good weekend. Jackie, Tulu, Amy, appreciate it. Next, we're going to take you back to Michigan 1 year after the election to talk to the voters who helped this president do the unthinkable to many, flip this state from blue to red, why they do not blame the president for much and point their finger at Congress instead. Do you not blame President Trump at all for not being able to get any major legislation passed yet?
Well, I think his way of speaking to people could have a big difference on it, and his way of saying, well, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, this is it.
He could do it better.
Maybe a little bit more diplomatic in his conversation and his presentations.